So I'm coming to you from my farm. My wife and I farm near Creemore, Ontario. And I'm going to talk primarily tonight about climate change and agriculture. That's really my area of expertise, a little bit about food security and farmland protection. But I wanted to start out with just a little primer. Agriculture is unique because it is both an important source of greenhouse gases and is also particularly vulnerable to climate change. So when we talk about agriculture, we really have to focus both on mitigation and adaptation. Um, about 10% of Canada's national emissions come directly from activities on farm, from primary agriculture. And again, agriculture is unique because we have a fairly even distribution of the three main greenhouse gases that we produce. So we produce carbon dioxide on farms. That's primarily coming from burning fossil fuels, diesel in our tractors and equipment, and from our soils, our agricultural soils. So the carbon, the organic matter that's stored in our soils through different farming practices can be released into the atmosphere, and that's a source of CO2. We also produce nitrous oxide, as we all know, a much more powerful greenhouse gas, and that primarily comes from nitrogen fertilizer. So when we talk about mitigating emissions from agriculture, nitrogen fertilizer is absolutely key. It is the fastest growing source of emissions in Canadian agriculture. Nitrogen fertilizer use is growing exponentially across Canada. And it's also a major expense for farmers. So it offers an opportunity there as well for reduction. And then agriculture also produces a lot of methane, and that's primarily methane comes from a bunch of different sources on farmland, but it's primarily coming from ruminant animals, grazing animals, and mostly from cattle. So cattle produce a lot of methane. So we have a distributed emissions coming from many farms all across Ontario and across the country. We have lots of different sources on the farm. Those sources are really hard to measure accurately at the farm level, and they so we have and then we also have that vulnerability to climate change, the fact that as people who rely on the weather, we're extremely vulnerable to that to the effects of climate change. So the good news is that we have practices that are widely known, and it was Louise who said at the beginning, or no, it was the recording at the beginning from David Suzuki. The solutions are known. We have the solutions. We know the practices that we can implement on our farms that reduce our emissions, that sequester carbon in our soils, and make us more resilient to in the face of climate change. And that's something I should have mentioned that's also unique about agriculture is we are one of the few sectors that has the ability to sequester carbon, to draw carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in our soils in large quantities. So while we're spending billions of dollars investing in startups that are looking at direct air capture to solve the climate crisis, in agriculture, we have very efficient, low cost direct air capture technologies for capturing atmospheric carbon, and those are called plants. We do it every day on our farm. So when we talk about the practices that can increase resilience, decrease emissions, sequester carbon, there are lots of them on the farm, but I'll give one example, which is the use of cover crops. So we grow cover crops on our farm. These are crops that we grow not to harvest, but to feed soil microbes, capture carbon, improve soil quality. So we grow, when we finish harvesting our main crops, we plant things like winter rye. We plant legumes that fix atmospheric nitrogen and add them to the soil. And those cover crops increase soil organic matter, which helps first of all, draws carbon out of the atmosphere. It also makes us much more resilient in climate change because the more organic matter we have in the soil, the higher the water holding capacity of that soil. So we can absorb water in extreme rainfall events, which we're seeing more frequently. And we can also retain water through drought periods, which we're also seeing more frequently with climate change. So on the policy side, I guess this is a theme that agriculture is unique because it's a shared jurisdiction between the federal government and provincial governments. So when we're looking at climate policy in Ontario, it's not just the Ontario government that's driving things, it's also the federal government. By far the biggest sort of agricultural policy instrument in the country is what's called the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. It is renegotiated every 5 years between the feds and the province. The current partnership, which is called the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, goes until 2028, and it's about $3.5 billion of funding over 5 years. So not a lot of money when we compare to the numbers that we're hearing in the energy sector, for example. The biggest segment of that policy or that funding envelope goes to business risk management programs, which are things like crop insurance for farmers. And I'll just wrap up by saying that I think this is an example of where we're really, really vulnerable. The subsidized crop insurance that farmers use is absolutely vital to the functioning of our agricultural system, and it's increasingly under strain and under threat. I don't have stats for Ontario, but last year in Alberta, they paid out $1.6 billion in excess crop insurance payments due to severe weather there. So the climate change threatens our ability to grow food. It also threatens the financial stability of our agricultural system.
Thank you so much, Brent. And thank you to each of the